Of course. Here is the paraphrase script. Maintaining this encryption, near still will slightly alter the word order and sentence structure. نجمة. In the quiet question of Hexam, just it said no castle, something impossible occurred that would challenge your we believed we knew about life, death, and the human soul. ماي 1957 Tunist sisters met failed in a corrected to a walking at Sunday church office. 18 months later the day, their devastated parents welcomed two daughters into the world. What followed would become one of modern history's most documented and chilling cases. It was a story that forced the most skeptical scientists to question whether consciousness can truly survive. The twins displayed knowledge they could possibly possess, bore physical marks identical to their deceased sisters, and spoke in terrifying detail about their own failed deaths. For 20 years, researchers from the University of Virginia would study this family, document reliefs that defied free law science. Before we continue with the impossible daughters of the Roberts family, subscribe to Liturgy of Fear and listen the comment suits that you listen from. We live here in former community of mystery seekers across America. What you're about here is folklore or legend. This is a case meticulously investigated by Dr. Dean Stephens, one of the 20th century's most respected psychiatrists, and documented in barefoot medical journals. The evidence is so compelling, so disturbing, that it continues to haunt researchers decades later. In 1957, Hexam was the kid of small Christian were everyone, where church bells marked life's rhythm, and where tragedy, and threat, shattered the entire community. The Roberts family had built their lives around Satan routine. Joe Roberts, a devout Catholic convert, ran a modest grocery and milk delivery business with his wife Flores, a former self-assured member who had embraced Catholicism about their marriage. Their home buzzed with the energy of a large family. 6 children total, 4 boys and 2 precious daughters who were the late of their births. 11 شرطة والجوان was the family's little mother. Mature beyond her years, she had a natural gift for creativity and انشركة بدفوش ترينك her sister. 6 شرطة والجاكل was Joanne's shadow, a bright, energetic child who followed her older sister everywhere, mimicking her every gesture and handed on her every word. The two were inseparable in that special only sisters can be. Jackal bore a distinct score on her forehead from a childhood accident where she had fallen struck her head on a metal bucket, leaving a permanent mark that would become significant with no one could imagine. She also had a small, dark birthmark on her left side, just above her. Little details that seemed insignificant at the time. The Roberts families live for both their and their close-knit community and their Catholic faith. Every Sunday, like clockwork, the family would attend morning service at the local church. The girls left these walks to church, chattered about their week, their friends, their future dreams. Flores would dress them in their fancy clothes, and then would skip ahead of their birds, their laughter echoed through Hexam's quiet streets. But beneath the surface of this picture-perfect family life, Joe Roberts harbored a secret belief that would soon become central to her story. Despite his devout Catholic faith, or perhaps because of a deeper spiritual curiosity, John had long believed in reincarnation. This belief had taken root when he was just 9 years old after a novice introduced him to the concept. Throughout his adult life, he would pray not just for the selfish of souls, but for proof that consciousness could return, that this was not the final chapter. Flores, practical and grounded in traditional Christian doctrine, found her husband's beliefs troubling, if blasphemous. It was a source of tension their otherwise harmonious marriage. None of them could have imagined that Joe's brave brothers were about to be answered in the most horrifying way possible. ماي 1957 dawned bright and clear in Hexam. The Roberts family prepared for their usual Sunday routine. Breakfast, curtain dress in their church clothes, and the family walked morning service. Joanne wore her favorite blue dress, while little Jackal had chose a yellow frock that made her feel grown up. The girls were excited because their friend, Anthony Lade, a 19 old boy from the neighborhood, would be joining them for the walk to church. At approximately 10:15 صباحا, the three children set out together, taking the route they had walked countless times before. The streets or quay, as most of Hexham was either prepared for church or already intended at a rare service. The children walked along the familiar path, their voices carrying on the cusps as they discussed the upcoming church service and their plans for the afternoon. What happened next would haunt the community for decades come. A local woman named Marjorie Wynne, who lived in the area, had been stricken with severe personal problem for weeks. Days earlier, her own children had been taken from her custody due to her unstable mental state and chronic dependence on prescription drugs. On this particular Sunday morning, she had consumed a dangerous combination of barbiturates and was in a state of complete psychological breakdown. At 10:27 صباح a.m., witnesses would later testify, when deliberately drove her car onto the sidewalk where the three children were walking. The impact was instantaneous and devastating. Joanne Roberts was killed immediately. Jackal Roberts suffered massive head trauma and died en route to the hospital. Young Anthony Lillard fought for his life but succumbed to his injuries hours later. The scene that created first responders was one of unimaginable horror. The peaceful Sunday morning had been shattered by an act of senseless violence that would leave scars on everyone who witnessed it. Bloodstains the perfumed were moments before children's laughter had faded there. The blue and yellow dress that the Roberts and Cruz had chose so carefully that morning were not torn and stained with blood. News of the tragedy spread through Hexham like wildfire. The closest community was starting to cease. How could something so evil happen in their quiet town? How could three innocent children walking to church on a Sunday morning be killed in such a brutal manner? For John and Florence Roberts, the news arrived like a physical blow. One moment they were already about their daughters being left for church. The next they were being told their children were dead. The grief was overwhelming, all-consuming. Florence collapsed upon hearing the news, while John stood in shock, unable to process the reality that his two beloved daughters were gone forever. The funeral was held 3 days later. The entire town turned, unable to stay away from this collective tragedy. Two small white coffins side by side, flowers covered every full by surface, and the sound of sobbing that seemed to come from every corner of the church. The Roberts family was shattered, broken in a way that seemed remarkable. In the days and weeks that followed, Florence retreated into herself, barely speaking, barely eating. The house that had once echoed with the Cruz laughter now felt like a tomb. Their toys remained exactly where they had left them, their bells made from that fine Sunday morning, their clothes hung in closets like costly reminders of life tragically short. But while Florence mourned in sales, Joe Roberts began to grow with intensity that frightened his wife. Night after night, she would find him kneeling in their daughter's room, whispering fervent prayers. But these weren't prayers for the Cruz souls trust in peace. These were desperate pleas for their heir. As the months passed, the Roberts family struggled to rebuild their lives around the cabin how left by their daughter's deaths. Florence had stopped going to church entirely, unable to reconcile her faith with the senseless tragedy that had befallen her family. John continued to tend the surface, but his brothers had taken on intensity that worried both his wife and their breast. 8 months after the acid, something happened that would change everything. Florence discovered she was broken. The news should have brought joy to the Griffin family, but instead it unleashed a storm of emotions and beliefs that threatened to tear the Roberts marriage apart. While Florence saw the pregnancy as a blessing, a chance for new life to heal their wounded family, John became convinced of something that terrified his wife. He was certain that Florence would give birth to twins. More than that, he was absolutely convinced that their dead daughters would return to them through reincarnation. They're coming back to us, Florence, John would whisper to his wife as she lay in bed at night. I can feel them. Joanne and Jackal were coming home. Florence was horrified by her husband's certainty. As a devout Catholic, she knew that belief in reincarnation was considered heretic. The fiery suggestion that souls could return to their nobodies wouldn't count the phrase in the church taught as this and selfish. She begged John to stop talking about such things, warned him that he was risking his immortal soul with such blasphemous thoughts. But Joe's conviction only caused stronger as the pregnancy progressed. He couldn't feel the paralysis of his daughters in the house, particularly in their old bedroom. He would spend hours sitting in their room, talking to them as if they were still alive, telling them about the new life crown in their mother's womb. The pregnancy itself seemed normal enough. Florence Dr. Dior Marquardt conducted regular checkups and ensured the couple that the fetus was progressing well. During multiple examinations, Dior detected only one heartbeat, one fetus. There was no indication of a multiple birth. But John remained adamant. There will be two, he insisted anyone who would listen. My daughters are returned together, just as they left together. The tension in Robert's household became unbearable. Florence found herself caught between grief for her lost children and fear for her husband's sanity. She confided in close friends that she was considered relief from John, that his obsession with reincarnation was destroying what remained of their family. The fiery mention of the word twins would send her into tears of frustration and fear. As her due date approached, Florence's anxiety reached a breaking point. She was terrified not just of the physical demands of childbirth, but of what her husband expected from this pregnancy. What would happen if she gave birth to a second child? Would Joe's disappointment destroy him completely? And what if, by some impossible chance, he was right? The labor began in the early hours of October 14, 1958, exactly 18 months after the deaths of Joanne and Jack Roberts. Florence was rushed to the local hospital with John Bassett anxiously in the waiting room, his breath mixed with an almost mankind speech. Dior Thornton had prepared for the birth of a single child based on all her examinations. The hospital staff was ready for a routine delivery. No one was prepared for what actually happened. At 3:47 صباح a.m., Florence Roberts gave birth to her first daughter. The baby was healthy, beautiful, with dark hair and pierced eyes that seemed to look directly at the people surrounding her. But before anyone could fully process his birth, the contractions began. At 4:12 صباح a.m., a second daughter arrived. The medical staff was stunned. Dior Thornton would later admit that in 30 years of practice, she had never encountered a case where a twin pregnancy had gone completely undetected through multiple examinations. The technology of 1958 was limited, but she had been certain there was only one child. When Joe Roberts was told he had twin daughters, his reaction was unlike neither the hospital staff had for witness. Rather than the typical joy and surprise of a new father, he displayed almost a calm, as if he had known this would happen all along. Of course there are two, he said quietly. Joanne and Jackal have come home. The twins are identical, born from the same egg, a fact that would later be confirmed through blood tests. They are named Jeline and Jennifer, and at the first glance, they appeared to be perfectly normal, healthy, identical twin sisters. But as the nurses scanned and examined the babies, something unusual was noted in the medical records. While the twins are genetically identical, sharing the exact same DNA, Jennifer bore distinctive markings that her sister did not possess. On Jennifer's forehead, just above her right eyebrow, was a peculiar birthmark, a razor-edged mark that bore uncanny resemblance to a scar. The marking was in exactly the same location where Jackal Roberts had carried her distinctive scar from the back exit. If more uncertain, Jennifer had a dark, round birthmark on her left side just above her. It was identical in size, shape, and location to the birthmark that Jackal had possessed. The medical staff found these markings baffling. Identical twins, by definition, should share the same physical characteristics. They develop from a single fertilized that can carry identical genetic information. For 1.5 birthmarks that deliver lacked was scientifically enormous. Dior Thornton documented these markings carefully in the medical records, noting their unusual nature. She had delivered hundreds of twins over her career and had never encountered anything quite like this. The birthmarks were distinctive enough that she photographed them for the hospital records, a decision that would prove crucial to future investigators. When Florence first held her daughters, she felt a complex mixture of emotions. Joy at either self-rifle was trembled by an inexplicable sense of unease. There was something about Jennifer, the twin with the markings, that stirred uncomfortable feelings. The babies seemed older somehow, more known than a newborn should be. John, meanwhile, studied his new daughters with intensity that made the nurses uncomfortable. He examined Jennifer's birthmarks with a look of recognition that should force the bone. When she asked him what he was thinking, he simply smiled and whispered, "Welcome home, Jackal." The family returned to their house in Hexham when the twins were 3 weeks old. But their homecoming would mark the beginning of a series of events that would challenge the phrase the Roberts family believed about life, death, and the nature of human consciousness. What happened next would attract the attention of researchers from around the world and force the most skeptical scientists to confront the possibility that some mysteries cannot be explained by conventional understanding. For the first year of the twins' lives, that seemed like perfectly normal babies. They cried, they slept, they reached the typical developmental milestones right on schedule. Flores allowed herself to believe that perhaps Joe's strange obsession had been nothing more than Gryffindor's deluge, and that their family could finally begin to heal. But when the twins reached 18 months of age, this amount of time that had passed between their sisters' deaths and their own birth, afraid of change. The first incident occurred on a cold February morning in 1966. Florence was cleaning the house while the twins played quietly in the living room. The family had recently returned from a trip to their storage shed in the corridor where John had retrieved some odd items they needed. Among these items were toys that had belonged to Joanne and Jackal. Toys that had been carefully packed well after the accident stored where the twins could never have seen them. Without any prompting or explanation, Julie walked directly to a particular doll that had been Joanne's most treasured possession, a Bosselfels doll named marker that Joanne had received for her 80th birthday. The doll had distinctive features: orange hair, a blue felt dress, and a small chip on her left hand from where Joanne had accidentally dogged her. Julie picked up the doll, credited it with the exact same protective gesture that Joanne had always used, and said clearly, "Yemma, marker, I've missed you so much." Flora stood froze, unable to process what she was witness. How could 18 شرطة من شرطة would she know the doll's name? How could she display such familiarity with a toy she had never seen before? But this was only the beginning. Jennifer, meanwhile, had found Jackal's favorite toy, a small stuffed rabbit with one ear slightly torn from years of constant companionship. The rabbit had been Jackal's bedtime companion for years. The toy she clutched door of storms and carried everywhere she went. Jennifer held the rabbit with instant recognition, brother's her cheek in exactly the same way Jackal had encountered him. "Bunny," she whispered, using this specific nickname that only Jackal had ever used for the toy. Flores called for Joe, her face trembling with shock and fear. When he entered the room and saw his daughters playing with the toys of their deceased sisters, displaying the knowledge and behavior they couldn't possibly have learned, his face went wet with a mixture of indication and terror. "You see," he whispered to Flores. "I told you they had come back." But Flores was not ready to accept such an impossible explanation. There had to be a rational reason. Perhaps the children had offered comfort such as the toys. Perhaps they had seen them before and simply remembered. She desperately searched for an illogical explanation that didn't involve the supernatural. Over the following weeks, however, the effects became impossible to know. The twins began displaying knowledge and behaviors that defied the rational explanation Lawrence could construct. Just when we thought we'd seen it all, the horror and the robots had intensified. If the story is kept for you chills, share this video with a friend who loves dark mysteries. Hit that like button to support our content. And don't forget to subscribe to know for more stories like this. Let's discover together what happens next. As the twins grew older and their vocabulary expanded, they began to speak about things that chilled their birds deep. These weren't the typical imagined comes of young children. These were detailed, specific references to experiences they couldn't possibly have had. One afternoon in the spring of 1961, when the twins were 2.5 years old, Florence offered them playing together in their bedroom. The conversation she heard made her blood run cold. "Do you remember when we walked to church that Sunday?" Jillian was saying to Jennifer, her face carrying the authority of an older sister. "You were already real others, the one with the little bats." Jennifer nodded solemnly. "I remember. We were with Anthony. He was telling us about the new bicycle he wanted for his birthday." Florence crept closer to the door, staring at her every word. The details were discussed right here. Jekyll had indeed worn a yellow dress that felt Sunday, and Nancy Lilith had been talking about until a basic for his upcoming birthday. And then the call came. Jennifer continued, her face became small and frightened. It was so loud, and the lady behind the wheel looked so angry. Do you remember how much it hurt? Gillian's response said shivers though Flores' bay. I remember the blood. There was so much blood and the sands, the scream. Flores burst into the room, her hand shaking. What were you guys talking about? She demanded, though both of her did want to know the answer. The twins looked up at her with eyes that seemed forward for the reinforce. We were just remembered, Gillian said simply, before we came back. The conversations between the twins became a regular curse, although they thought no one was listening. They would discuss details about their brief life that they couldn't possibly know, the layout of the old bedroom, the names of schoolmates, specific conversations they had supposedly had with their grandmother. But perhaps most disturbing were the moments when they would discuss their own deaths. Flores would sometimes find them comforting each other after nightmares. Nightmares filled with the sound of screeching tears and the impact of melting flesh. One particularly unsettling said occurred when the twins were 3 years old. They were blooming with those when Flores heard Jennifer said to Gilly, when the core hit us, I couldn't breathe. My nose and mouth were full of blood and the face went dark. Gilly responded by gently touching Jennifer forward right on the birthmark that matched Jekyll's score. That's where you hit your head, she said softly. That's where the mark came from. Flores consulted their family doctor about these conversations, worried about the psychological impact such memories might have on her daughter. The aunt was busy but suggested that children often have vivid imaginations and might be picking up details from overheard adult conversation. But Flores knew this explanation didn't account for the specificity of their knowledge or for the emotional weight behind their words. These weren't the products of childish imagination. They carried the gravity of actual memory. The most chilling moment came when Jennifer, at age 3.5, pointed her birthmark during bath time and said matter-of-factly, this is where I cut hurt when I fell on the back. It never stopped hurting. Even after I died. Florence's skepticism was crumbling. The evidence was becoming too overwhelming, too specific, too emotionally authentic dismissed as concepts or imagination. Word of the Roberts twins had begun to spread beyond their small community. Local newspapers picked up the story, and it was long before it reached the attention of the international research community. In 1963, Dr. Ian Stephens, a psychiatrist from the University of Virginia, contacted the Roberts family to study in their case. Dr. Stephens was already well known in academic circles for his research into reported case of reincarnation. Though his work was often met with skepticism from mainstream science, he had been documenting cases of children who claimed to remember previous lives, traveling around the world to interview families and gather evidence. When Dr. Stephens first met the Roberts family, the twins were 4 years old, in optimal for his research, as he had found that children's memories of supposed past lives were strongest between the ages of 3 and 6, typically faded as they grew older. The first thing Dr. Stephens did was conduct a thorough physical examination of both twins, paying particular attention to Jennifer's distinctive birthmarks. He photographed and measured the markings, noted their exact location and characteristics. He then compared these findings to medical records and photographs of Jekyll Roberts' score and birthmark. The correlation was startling. Not only were the marks in identical locations, but they showed the same size, shape, and texture. Dr. Stephens noted that Jennifer's forward marking would become more prominent during cold weather, exactly as Jekyll's score had behaved. Dr. Stephens conducted extensive interviews with both parents, documented referenced, referring unusual behavior, referee statement the twins had made that suggested knowledge of their sister's lives. He was particularly interested in the timeline of events and the credibility of the witness. What impressed Dr. Stephens most was Flores Roberts' reluctance to accept the reincarnation explanation. Unlike her husband who embraced the possibility, Flores continued to search for rational explanation. This made her testimony particularly valuable, as she had no psychological investment in proof or reincarnation. During his thesis, Edward Stephens observed the twins directly, noting their behaviors and interaction. He watched as they demonstrated familiarity with objects and beliefs from their sisters' lives, dispelling a knowledge that seemed impossible for children their age to possess. One particularly compelling test occurred when Edward Stephens showed the twins photographs of various people from their community, including some who had been friends of Joanne and Jackal. Without prompting, the twins were able to identify several individuals by name, including some they had supposedly never met in their recruit life. Edward Stephens also documented the twins' forbidden fears. Both children displayed intense fear of automobiles that seemed disproportionate to any normal childhood anxiety. They would become agitated at the sound of car engines and would refuse to walk near busy streets. This fear was particularly pronounced when the encounter caused being driven erratically or at high speed. The researcher was struck by the twins' different personalities, which seemed to mirror those of their deceased sister. Gillian displayed the nurtured, protective instinct that had characterized Joanne, while Jennifer exhibited the more dependent, follower personality that had defined Jackal. Edward Stephens would continue to study the Roberts family for over 20 years, documented their case in multiple academic papers and books. He considered their story one of the most compelling pieces of evidence for reincarnation he had ever encountered. As the twins grew older, their unusual behaviors and memories continued manifesting ways that terrified their bears. The children seemed to carry not just the knowledge of their sisters' lives, but also the trauma of their failed deaths. Both Gillian and Jennifer suffered from recurrent mothers that would leave them screaming in the middle of the night. Florence would rush to their bedroom to find them trembling, describing dreams of being hit by cars, of feeling pain and terror, of experiencing the moment of death itself. The Laldine de Pollock and cry, Jennifer would sob after one of these nightmares. She wanted hers because she was sad about her own children. I could see it in her eyes just before. These dreams were so vivid and traumatic that Florence began sleeping in the twins' bedroom. Fred left them alone with their terror-filled memories of events they had supposedly never experienced. The twins' fear of course became so severe that it impacted their daily lives. They would refuse trading vehicles, become hysterical at the mere suggestion. When they had to travel by car for necessary trips, they would head together in the back seat, clutch each other and whisper reassurance. But perhaps most disturbing were the moments when the twins would comfort each other with knowledge that seemed to come from beyond their current existence. Florence also offered Gillian telling Jennifer, "Don't worry about these scary dreams. I know it all. When we died, but we're safe now. We came back together just like we promised we would." The psychological weight of these experiences began to take its toll on the entire family. Florence found herself questioning her own sanity, wondering if she was somehow encouraging these behaviors or misinterpreting the normal childhood development. The strain on her marriage with John intensified as his conviction about reincarnation clashed with her desperate need for rational explanation. Their older children, the twins' brothers, also struggled with this situation. They had left their deceased sisters deeply and found it both wonderful and terrifying to see glimpses of Joanne and Jackal in their new siblings. The family dynamics became complex and emotionally charged. As the twins approached their 5th birthday, Edward Stephens warned the family that the memories and behaviors might be counterfeit. His research had shown that children typically lost their supposed past life memories around this age as their current life experiences began to dominate their consciousness. Edward Stephens' prediction proved accurate. As Gillian and Jennifer approached their 5th birthday in 1963, the behaviors and memories that had defined their early years began to feel like morning mist. The change was gradual at first. The twins stopped spontaneously discussing their previous life experience. They no longer demonstrated the same immediate recognition of their sisters' belongings or showed knowledge of events from before their birth. The intense fear of automobiles began to diminish, though it never completely disappeared. By the time they turned 6, Gillian and Jennifer had no conscious memory of ever claiming to be reincarnated. When asked about their earlier statements and behaviors, they would look confused, as if their parents were describing the experiences of completely different children. Edward Stephens documented this transition carefully, noting that the father of memories coincided with the twins' increased socialization through school and their co-identification with their current lives. It was as if their childhood personalities had been temporarily inhabited by something else, something that had none deported. Flores felt a complex mixture of relief and loss as she watched her daughters become normal children. On one hand, she was grateful that the unsettled behavior had ended, and her family could begin life without the constant reminder of tragedy and impossible explanation. On the other hand, she found herself mourning the loss of what had felt like a funny connection to Joanne and Jackie. Joe's reaction was different. He viewed the fading of the twins' memories not as a return to normalcy, but as the completion of some cosmic process he didn't fully understand. They came back to us that death is the end, he would tell anyone who would listen. And now they've moved on to life their own lives. The twins grew up normally after this transition, excelling in school and developing their own distinct personalities and interests. They maintained a close relationship throughout their childhood and adolescence, but it was the normal bond of sisters, not the otherworldly connection they had seemed to share in their early years. Dear Stephens continued to check with the family periodically, documenting the twins' development and the long-term impact of their early experience. When he met with Jeline and Jennifer as adults in their 20s, they had no memory of their supposed past life experiences and were somewhat skeptical about the whole concept of reincarnation. However, there was one financial development that occurred when Jeline was 23 years old. In 1981, she began experiencing what she described as inner visions, vivid mental images of blending in a chord with her brothers as a young child. She could describe in perfect detail a house with orchards and specific landscape features. The descriptions perfectly matched the family's former home in Wickham, where they had lived when Joanne was 13. Julie had never visited this house in her current lifetime. Yet, her descriptions were so accurate that they shocked her parents and or Stephens. But these visions faded quickly and never returned. Stephens' study of the Roberts twins became one of the cornerstone cases in reincarnation research. He documented over 30 specific correlations between the twins' behaviors and memories and the lives of their deceased sisters. The case was featured prominently in his academic papers and books, including Nejma Children who remember previous lives Nejma and Nejma Reincarnation and Biology Nejma. The physical evidence, particularly Jennifer's birthmarks, remained the most compelling aspect of the case. Blood tests confirmed that the twins were monozygotic, identical, meaning they shared identical DNA. This made Jennifer's distinct marking as scientifically anomalous, as identical twins should not have such significant physical difference. Stephens' documentation of the case include detailed photographs of Jennifer's birthmarks and their correlation to Jekyll scores, extensive interviews with family members and community witnesses, medical records from both the deceased sisters and the twins, behavioral observations conducted over multiple visits span 20 years, and testimony from independent witnesses who observed the twins in unusual knowledge and behavior. The case attracted both supporters and critics within the scientific community. Skeptics argued that the birds, particularly John with his strong belief in reincarnation, might have unconsciously influenced the twins' behavior through suggestion or selective interpretation of normal childhood development. However, supporters pointed to several factors that seemed to weaken this explanation. Florence Roberts' initial skepticism and resistance to the reincarnation interpretation, the specificity and accuracy of the twins' knowledge about events they could have learned through normal means, the physical birthmarks that matched the deceased sisters' scores, and the consistent pattern of behaviors observed by independent witnesses. Stephens himself remained cautious in his conclusions, threatening that while the case provided compelling evidence for some form of survival of consciousness after death, he could not definitively prove reincarnation. He did note, however, that conventional explanations seemed inadequate to account for all the observed phenomena. The Roberts twins case continued to challenge their understanding of consciousness, memory, and the nature of human identity. If decades later, researchers and philosophers debate the implications of the Stephens' findings. What makes this case particularly compelling is not just the individual piece of evidence, but their accumulated impact. The birthmarks alone might be dismissed as concepts. The behavioral similarities might be explained by genetics or family influence. These supposed memories might be attributed to imagination or suggestion, but taken together, these elements create a pattern that seems to be conventional explanation. How do we cat for identical twins who share the same DNA but have different birthmarks that match their deceased sisters' cause? How do we explain young children detailed knowledge of events from before their birth? How do we understand the psychological and emotional authenticity of their supposed memories? The case forces us to confront fundamental questions about the nature of conscious self. Is our sense of individual identity truly confined? Our physical bodies. Can memory and personality somehow burst beyond biological death? Other aspects of human experience that science has yet to understand or explain. For the Roberts family, these philosophical questions became intensely personal reality. They lived through experiences that challenged the faith they thought they knew about life and death. Whether we interpret their story as evidence of reincarnation, as an extraordinary series of coincidences, or as something else entirely, it remains one of the most thoroughly documented and baffling cases in the annals of unusual phenomenon. Florence Roberts, who died in 1979, never fully resolved her feelings about what her family had experienced. In her final years, she would tell interviewers that while she still struggled with the theological implications of reincarnation, she could not deny what she had witnessed with her own eyes. Joe Roberts, who passed away in 1985, maintained until his death that his daughters had indeed returned to him through reincarnation. He viewed their brief time showing memories of their past lives as a gift, a confirmation that life transcends death and that families can be reunited across the boundaries of mortality. Today, Gillian and Jennifer Roberts' life quite normal lives as it is. They have families of their own, careers, and the typical concerns of middle-aged doom. They remember nothing of their early years when they seemed to carry the memories and personalities of their deceased sisters, but their story continues to resonate with researchers, believers, and skeptics alike. The Lord Stephens's documentation of their case remains one of the most detailed studies ever conducted into the reincarnation phenomenon. The University of Virginia's Division of Perceptual Studies, which the Lord Stephens founded, continues to investigate similar cases around the world. The Pollock Twins case stands as a testament to the mystery that still surrounds human consciousness and the possibility that death may not be the absolute end we saw it be. Whether we view their story as compelling evidence for reincarnation, as a fascinating psychological phenomenon, or as an elaborate series of coincidences, it challenges to keep our minds open to possibilities that extend beyond our current scientific understanding. But there is one more base to this puzzle that the Lord Stephens discovered during his decades of research. Something that makes the Roberts case yet more extraordinary and terrifying than we've yet revealed. In 1978, when the twins were 20 years old, the Lord Stephens arranged for comprehensive blood tests to definitively establish their genetic relationship. The results confirmed what had been suspected all along. Gillian and Jennifer were indeed monozygotic twins, sharing identical DNA from a single fertilized egg. This finding was crucial because it made Jennifer's birthmark scientifically impossible according to conventional understanding. Identical twins, by definition, should share the same genetic blueprint and therefore the same physical characteristics. The paralysis of distinctive marks on only one twin suggested something beyond normal biological difference. But the Lord Stephens's investigation revealed something even more unsettling. Through historical research into medical records and family histories, he discovered that similar birthmark anomalies appeared in approximately 35% of the reincarnation cases he studied. Children bear marks that correspond exactly to underscores from their supposed previous incarnation. This pattern suggested that whatever phenomenon was occurring wasn't limited to Robert's family. Around the world, in cultures both belief and skeptical of reincarnation, similar cases were being documented. Children bear the physical marks of strangers who had died before their birth, carrying memories of lives they had never lived, displaying knowledge they could never have acquired through conventional means. The implications were staggering. If these cases represented genuine phenomena rather than elaborate coincidences, they suggest that human consciousness might operate according to laws that science had yet to discover or understand. Perhaps if more disturbing than the twins' own experience was what the Lord Stephens discovered about the community of action itself. During his investigation, He interviewed dozens of residents who had witnessed the twins' unusual behaviors firsthand. What emerged was a pattern of collective fear and deliberate sense. Many community members admitted that they had observed the twins demonstrate impossible knowledge about their deceased sisters, but had been too frightened to discuss it openly. Some described feelings spoke or natural when around the children during their early years, as if they were in the presence of something that defied natural order. A Morris Eleanor Hotwell, the twins' former nursery school teacher, eventually confided the Hort Stephens about incidents that had occurred in her classroom. She described how Jennifer, at age 3, had drawn detailed pictures of the collapse that killed her sister. Pictures that include the accurate details about the vehicle, the location, and if the explosion did driver's path. A Morris, Hotwell had been so struck by these drawings that she had destroyed them and reformatted them to the twins' births. I did told Ted Robert, she told the Hort Stephens years after. But those drawings, they were drawn by someone who had been there, someone who had seen what happened. How could a 3-year-old child know those things? The local Boston, William Davies, reported that during his deliveries to Robertson home, he had sometimes overheard it with having conversations about people in the community who had died before the children were born. They would discuss these deceased individuals as if they had known them personally, referring to brief details about their lives that weren't common knowledge. The Hort Stephens realized that the Robert Stone's case wasn't just about two extraordinary children. It was about an entire community that had collectively witnessed something that challenged their understanding of reality. The sales that surrounded their experiences wasn't just skepticism. It was fear. As the Hort Stephens' research progressed, he began to understand the psychological toll that the twins' experiences had taken on the entire Roberts family. The phenomenon that John had brought for and welcomed as a blessing had become a source of uncalled trauma and disruption. Florence Roberts' health had deteriorated significantly during the twins' early years. She suffered from chronic insomnia, anxiety attacks, and periods of deep depression. Medical records showed that she had been prescribed various medications for stress-related conditions, though she rarely discussed the true source of her distress with her doctors. How do you explain to a physician that your children remember being murdered? She once asked the Hort Stephens during an interview. How do you describe the feeling of watching your dead daughters looking at you through the eyes of their sisters? The twins' older brothers also struck with the situation. They had left Joanne and Jackal deeply, and seen the compass of their personalities in the twins created a confusing mixture of joy and grief. Some of the boys reported having nightmares about their deceased sisters, dreams where they were told that death wasn't permanent, and that anyone could return. Joe Roberts, despite his satisfaction at having his beliefs validated, also paid a psychological price. Friends and neighbors began to avoid him, viewing his certainty about reincarnation as evidence of mental instability. His business suffered as customers felt uncomfortable around him. The Catholic Church eventually asked him to stop attending the services after he repeatedly contradicted church doctor during discussions about death and selfish. I call what I brought for, John told the Hort Stephens in 1982, 3 years before his death. But I never realized that proof would be so terrifying at life with. One aspect of the case that the Hort Stephens found particularly compelling was the medical impossibility of Jennifer's birthmarks being found only one of two identical twins. He consulted with geneticists, dermatologists, and embryologists seeking any conventional explanation for this phenomenon. Dr. Margaret Fitzgerald, a leading genetist at Cambridge University, examined the Hort Stephens' documentation and photographs. Her conclusion was unequivocal. Given that these twins are monozygotic, shared identical DNA, the presence of distinctive birthmarks on only one child is medically explainable using our current understanding of human development. The birthmarks themselves defied normal patterns. Jennifer's forward marking not only matched the location of Jackal's score, but also exhibited some unusual characteristics. Like Jackal's score, it would become more permanent during cold weather and would occasionally cause Jennifer discomfort in exactly the same way Jackal had described. If more baffling was the emotional and psychological response these marks triggered in Jennifer. As a young child, she would sometimes touch the birthmark on her forehead and describe feeling sad or hurt, though she could explain why. She would tell her parents that the mock remember being hurt, using language that suggested the birthmark itself carried some form of memory. Zero. Stephens documented 14 other cases in his research where children bore birthmarks or birth defects that correspond to injuries sustained by individuals who had died before the children's birth. In the three cases, the marks appeared in exactly the same location and exhibited similar characteristics to the original ones. This pattern suggested to Stephens that whatever mechanism might be responsible for reincarnation, it somehow heightened not just memories and personality traits, but also physical imprints of traumatic experiences. The implications are stacker. If consciousness could survive death and return in a new body, it barely carried with it this cause of its brief existence. Despite his reputation as a leading researcher in reincarnation phenomenon, Stephens himself struggled with the implications of the Roberts case. His brief journals, made available after his death in 2007, reveal a man torn between scientific skepticism and the weight of evidence he had accumulated. I cannot honestly say that I believe in reincarnation in the traditional sense, he wrote in 1979. But I also cannot deny what I have documented. The Roberts twins, along with hundreds of other cases I have studied, bears in evidence that demands explanation. If not reincarnation, then what? Stephens considered various alternative explanations for the phenomenon he observed. Could telepathy or psychic phenomena account for the children's knowledge? Could some form of genetic memory explain their behavior? Could unconscious suggestion from family members create such elaborate and consistent patterns? Each potential explanation had serious limitations. Telepathy could account for physical birthmarks. Genetic memory could explain knowledge of specific events and conversations. Suggestion could produce the emotion authenticity and spontaneity of the children's response. In his final years, Stephens began to focus less on proof reincarnation and more on documenting anomalous phenomena that challenge conventional understanding of consciousness and memory. The Roberts case remained central to his work because it combined so many different types of evidence: physical, behavior, emotional, and testimony. Science advances by acknowledging what we can't yet explain, he wrote in his last paper on the Roberts twins. These children have shown us that there are aspects of human experience that our current paradigms cannot accommodate. Whether we call it reincarnation or something else entirely, we must remain open to the possibility that consciousness operates according to laws we have yet to discover. The story of the Roberts twins continues to influence research into consciousness and survival after death. The University of Virginia's Division of Perceptual Studies, now directed by Jim Tucker, continues to investigate similar cases around the world, building on Stephens' pioneer work. Modern technology has allowed researchers to conduct more sophisticated investigations than were possible Stephens' era. DNA analysis, brain imaging, and computer databases have provided new tools for verifying and analyzing current reincarnation cases. Yet, the fundamental questions raised by cases like the Roberts twins remain as puzzling as ever. The twins themselves, never twins, rarely discuss their early experience. They have requested privacy and have declared most enter for requests in recent decades. However, in a rare statement given researchers in 2010, Jill acknowledged that while she has no conscious memory of coming to be reincarnated, she cannot dismiss the extensive documentation of her childhood behaviors. I don't remember saying or doing those things, she said. But I trust that my parents and Stephens were honest in their reporting. Something happened to my sister and me during the years. I don't know what it was, but it was real enough to frighten our entire family. Jennifer has been more reluctant to discuss the case at all, but close friends report that she sometimes experiences with dreams about events from before her birth. Dreams that disturb her enough that she has sought counsel on several occasions. The Roberts twins case raises profound questions that extend far beyond the specific details of their experience. If consciousness can somehow survive death and return in a new form, what does this mean for our understanding of personal identity, moral responsibility, and the nature of existence itself? Philosophers and theologians have grappled with these questions for centuries, but cases like the Roberts twins provide specific, documented examples that bring abstract theories into sharp focus. If Jill and Jennifer truly carry the consciousness of their deceased sisters, or whether some individuals return, or whether no pain is influenced by residual memories from previous lives. The case also challenges our understanding of trauma and healing. If consciousness can carry physical and emotional scores from one lifetime to another, what are the implications for psychology and medicine? Could some forms of maintenance or unexplained physical conditions be related experiences from previous existence? These questions are unanswered, but the Robert Twins case ensures that cannot be easily dismissed. Whatever the ultimate explanation for their experience, their story demonstrates that human consciousness may be far more complex and mysterious than we currently understand. Perhaps the most haunted aspect of the Robert Twins case is what it suggests about the nature of love and family bonds. If we accept the possibility that Joanne and Jackal somehow returned to their family as Gillian and Jennifer, it implies that the connections between family members may transcend death itself. The twins' brief period of carrying their sisters' memories lasted only until their 5th birthday, exactly the age that they are. Stephens identified as a typical for past life recalling children. It was as if their consciousness had been temporarily shared with their deceased sisters, allowing for a final reunion before moving on to life their own life. This pattern suggests that whatever mechanism might be responsible for reincarnation phenomenon serves not just individual consciousness, but also the healing of families torn apart by tragedy. The Roberts parents, devastated by the failed deaths of their daughters, or given a few precious years of feeling that their children had returned to them, phoned briefly. The message seemed to be one of comfort and continuity, that love endures beyond death, that families can be reunited across the boundaries of mortality, and that tragedy, while painful, might not be the end of the story. This mystery shows us that there are aspects of human experience that challenge our deepest assumptions about life, death, and consciousness. The Roberts twins lived through something that defied conventional explanation, leaving us with more questions than answers about the true nature of existence. What do you think of this story? Do you believe the truth was revealed, or were there deeper mysteries yet being uncovered? Could the Roberts twins truly have been the reincarnation of their deceased sisters? Or is there another explanation for their extraordinary experience? Leave your comment below with your thoughts. If you enjoyed this tale and want more stories that challenge faith you thought you knew about reality, subscribe to Liturgy of Fear, hit the notification bell, and share this video with someone who loves mysteries that blur the line between the possible and impossible. The truth might be stranger than we dare to imagine. See you in the next video where we'll explore another case that says still can explain.